This is Michael Ruffino with Terrible at Fishing, your weekly show to help you catch the big one. This is Michael Ruffino from Terrible at Fishing with your fishing report for this week. With warmer weather here, we are looking at a week in the mid-80s and water temperatures are warming up. Lake of the Woods is experiencing their turn and the cold water is sinking while the warm water is surfacing. Lake surface temperatures as of Friday is 64 degrees. Trout could still be caught bank fishing around the Sunset campgrounds. Use a water bobber and get it out there. The resort's weekend festivity calendar has commenced, so free outdoor concerts on Saturdays and a free family outdoor movie night on Fridays. Gerber Lake is 37% capacity and is good for crappie and perch. Emigrant Lake is 71% full with a 63-degree surface temp and is in post-spawn for largemouth. Crappie fishing is epic there. Hyatt Lake is 65% and is also in post-spawn for largemouth. Howard's Prairie is 56% capacity and at 57 degrees also in post-spawn for largemouth. Agate Lake is 97% capacity and is experiencing good bluegill fishing. Fish Lake is at 73% and good rainbow trout fishing there. Willow Lake is at 63 degrees surface temp and is in post-spawn for largemouth. Join me every Friday night at 7 p.m. for a full hour of fishing news and tips. Or check out my YouTube channel, Terrible at Fishing, for live fishing and 1,000+ videos on how to get better at this great pastime. This week I thought we'd tackle probably one of the most fruitful lures that we can put on our line, and that's an inline spinner. An inline spinner is exactly that. It's what you would expect. Blue Fox makes it, Mepps makes it. You might be using rooster tails or whatever. But an inline spinner is a spinner that spins. Usually has a little decoration around it, little beads or a weight, and then a hook at the end. And spinners, there are two styles. There's a Mepps style, which, Mepps makes it. They invented it. And it uses an inline blade. And that blade sits right on that center shaft. And then there's those using a hinge on it. And those has like a little horseshoe that is strung onto the shaft. And then the blade is actually attached to that little horseshoe. So those are the two styles, the Mepps and the others. And which one is best? Well, it really depends upon you. You've probably been using Mepps for 50 years. And one thing about a Mepps with an inline blade is that inline spinner blade really doesn't spin very well at slow speeds. It has to go faster in order to get momentum on that blade. The other blades that are attached to this little hinge, they actually can spin at much slower speeds. And you can work this very gingerly through the water or very fast. There are usually two different types of blades. You got the big fat blade, call those Colorado blades, and then you got Alabama blades, they're skinnier. And those particular blades create different types of action in the water. Now, typically, I tell you to use dark baits in dark water. So typically, a brass blade in stained waters and silver blades in clear waters. Now, what colors to choose? Well, I make spinner blades for myself and for other people, whoever wants one. Each one is different. Each one of these are custom made, and so I never make two baits exactly the same. I will tell you that I do like the fat Colorado blades. I like being able to get action in a much slower retrieve. It gets noticed more in the water. And they just spin at very slow speeds. Now, colors. The color choice is really a matter of preference for the most part, but I love sort of a colorful blade. I like blades with flash to them. I like blades that have green and yellow or blues. We all know that trout see blue better than any other color. And bass, they don't see blue at all. So it depends on the type of fish that you want to shoot for. So if you're shooting for bass, I think you should have some blue on this bait or on the blade itself. Now, I've gone with like a rainbow colors on my baits, on my actual blade, and they work really, really well. And I usually throw about a 1/8 ounce blade or bait out there. You have to let that sink. So when this thing starts to sink and you're using, say, a Colorado blade, not a Mepps lure, and it's spinning on the way down, it'll actually spin as it falls through the water column. And when it falls about 3 to 5 seconds, depending on the depth of your water, then start retrieving it. I give it a little bit of, tug in order to activate the blade. And you can feel the blade spin by looking at the top and by feeling your rod. And you can feel that tension, just a little bit of tension. You know the blade is spinning. And just retrieve it. Now, I will go ahead and run it up and then stop. And then let it fall. And then pull, stop, and let it fall. And basically what it's doing is it's going up and down like a roller coaster in the water. Typically on the drop is usually when I get the hit. This is a fun technique and simple to do. Now, the hook, and you're going to find out later on this show how important hooks are. When I started making these, I used a simple number 10 hook. And it didn't work very well for me. So I had to redesign my baits. And now I use a Gamakatsu number 8 on this, which is strange about hooks. When it doesn't have a 0 following it, like a aught, we say 1 aught, 2 aughts, 3 aughts. Aught is just an English way of saying 0. When it's just a number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the bigger the number, the smaller the hook. I know, it's weird. When you got the 0 next to it, the bigger the number, the bigger the hook. I don't know who thought that up, but somebody thought it was very confusing to a fisherman. So I use a number 8 Gamakatsu, which is the sharpest hook I could buy, on my spinners now. And that will guarantee me that when the bite hits, the fish hits it, I not only can set that hook, but I can reel in the fish. A little hook that isn't very sharp is not going to land fish very often. It's just frustrating. It really is, because it doesn't stick in the fish very well, and they can just spit it out. And fish spit. I've never seen saliva coming from a fish, but I know they spit. And they can spit out a hook really, really fast. So when you find your spinners, find a brightly colored spinner, and one that easily spins in the water. Now, there's another bait called Blue Fox that makes a inline spinner. The Blue Fox is different than all other spinners. And I've purchased this 2-piece bell and clanger that goes inside this. And the neat thing about the Blue Fox is that as it is spinning, it makes a sound, a pitch that the fish are attracted to. The Blue Fox actually has sonic sound to it. I guess that's sort of redundant, sonic sound. But anyway, it will actually attract them not only visually, visually, I'm getting tongue-tied. I think I need a drink. Gotta love it. And then it'll go ahead and it does it visually as well as sonically. So the blue fox is actually quite an interesting bait. If you need your bait to sink faster or work deeper, if you're trolling, do not use a 1/8 ounce. That one's going to be required a 1/4 ounce or a 3/8 ounce spinner in order for you to troll and keep that spinner down into the water. Typically, I like to work my spinners in the lower third of the water column. So I will let that sink, typically 1 second per foot, depending on the weight. And what you can do is just drop it in front of you and see how long it takes it to hit that bottom and count it. And then when you throw it out there, you know where it is in the water column. Count to yourself and then start retrieving it. And then do a steady retrieve, pause it, let it sink another second or two, retrieve, pause, let it sink another second or two, and just keep doing that. Typically, you're going to be working towards that lower third of the water column where the fish are sort of hiding out in that vegetation or down near the bottom of the rocks. That spinner is going to get notice. So whether it be a blue fox with that sonic sound to it, or one of my spinners, or a MEPS, or a MEPS you're going to burn through faster. A MEPS is a bait that you're going to retrieve at a much faster speed in order to get that inline blade to spin on you. So very, very important. Dark color in stained waters, bright colors in clear waters. Lake of the Woods is clear water, okay? Lake of the Woods is 12 to 14 feet of clarity in that water. You're going to use a brightly colored spinner in Lake of the Woods and work in the lower third and do exactly what I've suggested. Retrieve, pause, sink. Retrieve, pause, sink. If you do that, you will find that you're going to catch perch, crappie, trout, and bass, both largemouth and smallmouth. The inline spinner is the most versatile bait or lure that you can use in water. You can use it to catch any fish that you have your heart set to, but they're not going to be necessarily big fish, but you're going to catch a lot of fish. So go out there and have a good time and go to the store, buy some brightly colored spinners, and make sure that what you get has a sharp hook on it. If you want to add a little bit to it, you can add power bait onto that hook. That's up to you. Sometimes it works better for me. Sometimes it makes no difference whatsoever. But power bait is something you can add to that hook and increase maybe a scent. So now you've got visually and the smell to attract a fish. Give it a shot. See what you think. But let me tell you, when I take people out fishing, there are certain baits that I enjoy putting on their line. A spinner and teaching them how to use it is the one bait that I can guarantee a fish through a day of fishing. Have fun, and we'll see you in the next segment. Stay tuned for Terrible Fishing. And check this out. Check me out on YouTube on my channel, Terrible at Fishing, and see all these different baits in action. You can even see me how I make a spinner bait. And you'll be surprised how easy it is for you to make a spinner bait, and it only costs you $1 or $2. So check it out and save some money and catch more fish. Welcome back to Terrible at Fishing. In this segment, one of the most popular videos on my YouTube channel, Terrible at Fishing, is on line breakage. A while back ago, I kept going through a bunch of fishing line. Most of it would just snap upon casting and was driving me crazy. If you've ever paid for a fishing line It's expensive. The braid, the fluorocarbons, the monofilaments, all those, they just cost you money. And some of it, a lot of money. And I was losing lures. I was getting frustrated with my lines just snapping upon casting. And so I started doing some research in some of the physics of it. Now, in a previous show, I talked about different lines: mono, braid, and fluoro. Now, monofilament stretches. It actually has some elasticity to it. So, and this is somewhat got to do with breakage. So, let's talk about breakage. Have you ever had your line break and lose a lure on casting? Well, there could be several reasons for it. One of it is the elasticity of the line. So some line doesn't stretch at all, like braid. And fluorocarbon, it has a little bit, but not much. And mono has a lot of elasticity. Think about the cast. So, you got your line, you got your weight, your lure on it, and you pull it back over your shoulder to cast it. And you whip it forward, releasing your line and throwing it. Think about that whip. A regular whip, that you see, a leather whip, the reason it makes a sound is that it's breaking the sound barrier. Believe it or not, that's what's happening. So as you whip that line from behind your head to forward, there is a lot of momentum and shifting of weight right at the very apex of that. It's whipping it. Well, there's a lot of tension at that point. If the line doesn't stretch at that point and has no stretching capability, depending on the weight of line that you have, and I use light line, it will snap because there's just too much pressure on that line upon that whip. And it breaks. Light line will break more often, obviously, because it doesn't have as much strength as heavy line does. But nonetheless, what you're doing upon whipping that out there, you're actually creating a lot of tension on that line, sometimes to the point of breaking. So what do you do about that? Well, some of it is just a matter of learning how to cast more gradually, so you don't whip it over your shoulder. And just actually remember that whipping action. When you bring it forward, make it more smoother and more gradual, and then work your momentum forward, but without making that whip. Then there's line test. I already just briefly talked about that. A lower line test of 4 pounds, 2 pounds, 6 pounds will break more often. But line, when you use line in the water, it actually goes through a lot of abrasions over rocks, over stumps, could be poles or anything in the water. Your line's going to rub against, and it's becoming that abrasion's weakening the line. And so inevitably, with line that you've used over and over again, it's got weak spots in it. And so when you cast it, even if it's a nice smooth cast, your lure will go flying away. So that can happen. Thing is, be aware of the area that you've used your line in, and if it's around a lot of debris, even plants, it can have some weak spots in it. And you might want to tie up, remove some of the line and retie your lure on it in order to eliminate any kind of abrasions on it. Some line says it's more abrasion resistant. Well, that kind of is a dead clue that you're going to have abrasions on your line, creates weak spots, and your bait goes flying away. Also, knots. Don't forget about knots. The better the knot, the less likely it's going to come untied. And the better the line, it'll hold the knot better. So monofilament, the stretchy stuff, doesn't hold a knot very well. Fluorocarbon and braid do hold knots better, braid being the best knot to hold. So I don't want you to lose your lure by creating a bad knot. My favorite knot to tie is something called a Palomar knot. If you go to my channel, I have some really good tutorials on knot tying, and the Palomar is a very simple knot that holds its strength against a lot of things. So check that out, that video, and or look it up on the internet or whatever, and see how to tie a Palomar knot. Something else about line ages. So it gets weaker with age. So I don't recommend you buying line from a garage sale and you expecting that line to be, even if it's new in the box, it could be 20 years old. That line is going to break on you. It's just designed to age. Your line on your reels should be replaced every year, depending on how much you fish. I do it twice a year on mine because I fish a lot. But you want to replace your line every fishing season. Before, in the off season, I go ahead and replace all my line on all my reels, and then I also service my reels by lubing them, taking them apart, making sure everything is top notch for the next season. It gives me plenty of time, months, to get this done. It doesn't take much time at all. You also want to make sure that you spool your fishing line properly. Spinning reels, which is what most people use, has a very strange way of spooling. And something called line twist happens a lot with a spinning reel. So if you look at a spool of line, it's got to come off that spool the same way it's going to go on to your spool on your fishing reel. So if you look at the side of, the front of a spool of line, it's got to be facing the flat part, facing your spool. And it's going to come off of it the way it's going to go on your reel. Bait casting is a lot easier. You're going to face the lines part of the spool of new line towards your reel, and it's going to come off again the way it's going to come off in the same wind as it's going on your spool. I do have some tutorials on that, but line twist is a common thing that causes weakness in fishing line. So if you're having this challenge of line breaking, think, is your line old? When was the last time you replaced it? How are you casting it? Are you whipping it behind you? That'll do it. Has that line seen a lot of abrasions? And more than likely it has. I mean, all of ours has. And if you've got 200 yards on your spool, take 50 yards off of it and just retie. If that's good line, then you've got rid of all the abrasions on it. So do that. And make sure that you've tied a very good knot. Make sure that you use something like an improved cinch knot or a Palomar knot or something like that. Use a good knot and make sure that that's not the reason. Whenever I lose a bait on a cast, I look at the end of my line. Did it break or did my knot come undone? And it's usually a break because my knots are pretty good. But sometimes that happens. I tie a bad knot in a rush and I didn't inspect my knot. So line breakage is something that we all deal with, but you have to invest in good line. So I use Power Pro braid 4-strand, and that works really well. I've had great success with that. And for my fluorocarbon, I use P-line, and I've had great success with that. But a lot of people have used, you can ask any fisherman and ask them what is their most reliable line. And you're going to see like Berkeley Trilene. Berkeley Trilene is a very affordable line. You can get them in huge spools, and it's a very good line. But again, nice thing about a huge spool, you should be replacing your line quite often, if indeed this is something that's happening to you. So at least once a year, and depending on how much you fish and the rods that you fish with, you're going to be replacing your line more often if you're going to be fishing more often. So hopefully this little bit of information helps you. Now I'd like to talk to you about hooks. I know. A hook's a hook. Hooks hook you. Hooks hook fish. But the secret weapon to any lure is a good hook. And the secret to landing a big fish, or any fish for that matter, is a good hook. So, what makes a hook good? It's actually something we call stickiness. I know, stickiness. Doesn't mean it's got bubble gum on the end of it. Stickiness is how it sticks in to something and holds on to it. And I use really good hooks in my baits. Now, the other day I was fishing, and the first two fish I hooked, they fell off the hook. And I pull in my bait, and I'm thinking, what in the world is wrong with this bait? It caught two fish, but they spit it out. So I looked at the hooks, and the hooks were worn. It wasn't a bait I made. This was a bait from a company called Sixth Sense, which makes a fantastic bait, and they use really good hooks. But this was an older bait that I like, and I haven't replaced the hooks on it. And the fish were able to spit it out. So this was, well, frustrating. So in the tackle box it went, and out came on a bait that I made. And I was able to hook fish and keep them. So, what makes a good hook? It's stickiness. What are good brands of hooks? Well, the way I kind of test a hook, one, visually. So I'm able to look at the hook and see if indeed it's been bent or worn or anything like that, if it's dull at the tip. I will then try to push my finger onto it. And a sticky hook will stick into the first layers of my skin and hold on to it. And if it doesn't, it's dull. And it's just not holding on to my skin. And it's not a good hook on that bait. Some brands that I use is, you might know of some of these brands. Gamakatsu is my favorite hook. And the Gamakatsus are strong and they're sticky. And believe me, on my big baits, I put hook covers on them because if you just lightly touch this hook, it will penetrate your skin. I've been buying smaller Gamakatsus for my smaller baits. And that, again, allows me to hook and keep a fish. There are other companies like KVD and Owner and Mustad, but some of those can make good hooks and not so good hooks. So when you go buy a hook, if you can open the package and test it, or actually look at reviews, that'll help you a lot in determining what hook to put on your baits. Almost all store-bought baits have to have the hook replaced on it. So you do that with a split ring plier. It's able to spread the split ring and allows you to replace the hook. So analyze the baits in your tackle box. If they're old, replace the hooks. Hooks can be expensive. Believe me, I pay $3 a hook sometimes. But that for $3 a hook's a big hook on my big baits. But it makes all the difference in hooking, keeping, and landing your fish. So hopefully you can get hooked on buying new hooks. Welcome back to Terrible at Fishing with Michael Ruffino. And last week you got to hear part one of my interview with Shane Blair of Blair's Guide Service, a company that I used last March as a gift from my wife. Let's listen to part two and the conclusion of this particular interview. I hope you enjoy it. You were just about to tell us about reels.
Yeah, so in terms of reels, same concept. I will say that you can get a spinning reel that'll catch a dozen steelhead for $39. You could probably even find one for $29. Now, a good entry level reel, Okuma makes quite a few, and they're bottom end. You're looking at that 39, 49, 50, $60. Um, if you're wanting to spend that $60, $70 range, Fluger President. So the Fluger Tryon series or the President series, right? So the Tryon series, I think, is $49 at Weimar. The average weekend warrior, fisherman, fisherwoman that's out there a couple times a month, that reel's going to last you years. If you get into where you're fishing every other day after work, you could bump up to a Fluger President. You're going to get a couple seasons out of that, and I think they run around $69, $70. I usually buy those at Bi-Mart. If there's a Bi-Mart in the area, it's really hard to compete with them. In terms of price, obviously, if you got your local tackle shops, always try to spend some money with those guys too. Those shops have been there a long time. So I try to shop local as much as I can. But the size, right? So, there's different series. There's 15 size, a 20 size, a 25, a 30. You want to have the line capacity. And so you can look on that reel, the box, and it'll tell you the line capacity for the line size. So like I run a lot of the 25 series. I don't know what it holds. I want to say it's around 120 yards of 10 or 12 pound, or maybe give or take. Don't quote me. But you want a reel that's not too small to where you don't have line capacity, but also not too large to where when you're fishing, you have this, what I call a coffee grinder. This big,
Yep.
heavy reel. You can't feel nothing. And if you fish hard, after you fish for 4 or 5 hours, you will get fatigued if you're casting a lot, right? It's
Yeah,
kind of a
especially
silly
the
concept.
next day. I mean, I used to
Yeah,
have the reels and my wrist was sore the next day. So now I actually
yeah,
for my spinning rods are 2000s. Those
uh-huh,
are my size reels. But
yep,
I also do a lot of bait casters for
yeah.
for bass fishing. So
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Level wind as well. Um, I don't recommend starting to learn to fish with a level wind. I
yeah.
recommend that you start with a spinning rod and
Yep.
understand the whole concept of casting and the weight orientation to the rod load, when to release, how to position your body. Like I was showing you, you point your
Yeah.
shoulder or your hip, right? You point your shoulder where you want it to go, and you point, and it'll go there just about every time. Um, the it's endless. You want to spend $50 or you want to spend 500, even 1,000. You can get on to Daiwa or Shimano Japan. You can get reels that you never even knew existed.
I just
So
I just I just bought a Shimano Aldebaran
oh
BFS.
boy, yeah,
And that's a $400 reel I had to save
that's a
up
nice,
for.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it is a no-brainer reel. I
uh-huh,
mean, for a bait caster, you don't even have to look at it. You don't have to worry about hitting the water before you're ready. I mean, the thing just is almost, I mean, I've backlashed it a couple times, but
yeah,
really hard to backlash that
yeah,
particular
yeah,
reel. So
yep,
sometimes when, if you can, for me, I had to save up for something like that. Before that, I was doing a Shimano BFS Curado, and
uh-huh,
among others. And I'm kind of a Shimano fan, so
yep,
that's just me.
yeah. No, same. Grew up with fishing Shimano. I still have my first Calcutta TE that I bought when I was 18.
Nice.
That's a sweetheart reel of mine. A lot of good memories with that. It just sits on the shelf. I don't use it anymore, but I still got.
I always tell, I think it was last week's show. It was like, I told people, you don't have to spend a lot of money, but if you invest in a decent quality rod, you'll fill the fish faster. You'll be able to land them better. And then a reel, basically, you just don't think about it. I mean, you shouldn't have to think about what's in your hand. You should be
Yeah,
focusing on what's at the end of the line. And
right. Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's kind of how I focus on, buying my equipment. I have a new rod coming tomorrow. It's a heavy rod. And but I had to save up for that. But
Yeah,
I don't want to think about what's in my hand.
yeah, and something in terms of a budget. There's a lot of combos out there. So a combo is going to be that rod and reel
Yep.
combo. You check out those tackle shops. You know, um, you can find a combo. I haven't really looked at them lately, but they've ranged at $50 to $100, and you can get a combo that'll last you a while. But something that I've seen a lot over the years is you'll see folks go out, they'll buy a G Loomis and a nice Shimano, and they show up to the fishing hole or wherever, and they don't know how to take care of it. They end up breaking it, and
Uh,
then they're really bummed, spend all this money to just start into it before they really know. So, get an entry level setup, get out there, get a feel for the process, and if it's something that intrigues you, there's so much information on which rod, which reel, which line, which technique. YouTube has changed the culture of fishing so immensely. Um, Anybody is capable of going and doing anything almost anywhere. There's still a few things that are quiet, and you got to be in the know. But in terms of being able to learn and get out there and figure it out, it's all right there. And if you really want to go learn a fishery, or have that experience, hire a guide in the area.
yep,
There's a lot of top notch men and women that guide in the state of Oregon that can show you a really first class experience at whatever body of water you want to fish in.
I agree. I mean, when I try when at Lake of the Woods, because of my health issues, I don't go solo anywhere.
Uh-huh.
But the um, I was fishing last week and I did a live, and these two girls were at the end of their dock, and I asked them how they were doing, and they didn't know how to do this or that. So I went over to them and I saw that what they were using. So I gave them a couple jigs. And so they tied them on. And I told them, I says, just cast it out there, let it sink for a few seconds. Now, when you retrieve it, just lift it up while you retrieve. It was like, I think it was on that first cast. She caught a fish. And you're right. I mean, you knew the rogue better. I mean, that was your territory.
Uh-huh.
And a good guide or a good fisherman with experience can teach somebody how to work a line because it's all about bait presentation. You know that. It's
Yep.
not necessarily what we have in our hand, but it's how we put at the end of the what's on that hook
Mm-hmm.
in putting it in front of the fish properly. And
Yep.
once
Yep.
that fish sees that hook or that bait properly, they'll hit it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's huge. I lost track of what I was just thinking about there, and
Sorry.
what you were talking, but the one thing that I will say is, going out and trying to learn to fish on your own, right? It's if you don't have a background, it can be humbling. It can be most of all frustrating, right?
Yeah.
You hear it all too often. I don't like this river, or I hate this river. I never catch anything. And like I always tell people, your attitude is everything. Come out here and have a good time, and guess what? Whether you catch a fish or not, your day will be better in the end. Um, but if you want to get a taste for fishing, um, and really get a true experience, go somewhere where there's success rates, right? Go somewhere where you could catch a nice bass, a nice rainbow. Maybe that lake's popular for crappie. Maybe the steelhead fishing is good at the time that you want to go try steelhead fishing. Or hey, the salmon are running on the Rogue. It's the peak months, right? Go try it then. Don't go put all your efforts into something when the opportunity's not there, right? You want to you
Yep.
want to be you want to have targets to create an opportunity with, and that's the biggest thing with learning how to fish on your own is there's got to be opportunity there.
Yeah. No, I, when I teach people, I teach them the seasons too,
Yeah.
and so what you were saying, and you're in your business, you got to work the seasons and the waters.
Yep.
And so if you take your clients out onto the Rogue or the Umpqua or wherever, you want them to have a good experience, but you wouldn't go on the Rogue when it wasn't hitting. You'd go somewhere else.
Yeah, and so
And
that's why I travel. That's what keeps my schedule. busy. I'm not full yet. I'm still building a business, and even when you've done this for 30 years, you're still building a business because people change what they like to do for fun. I've had some customers that have been customers of mine since the beginning, and they've passed away. And some of those people used to fish with me 10, 15 times a year. So it
Wow.
yeah,
I'm
so
poor.
it's you're trying, you know, chase the fish. That's kind of been my motto since the beginning is you got to chase the fish. You got to go where there's work, and you got to have a program there to be successful when you show up, right?
Yep.
You got to be successful. You got to have an understanding. Um, you know, you don't want to show up there and take your customers fishing somewhere where you've never been and show up there blind.
I
You know,
agree.
that's similar to going on for yourself. Do a little research, find out when the run timings are, find out, do these fish like a bobber and jig, or do they like, if you're steelhead fishing, do they like bobbers and jigs? Do they like soft beads? Do they like a spinner or a little Cleo? And some of those things will catch a steelhead anywhere, right? And the toughest thing now is for those that are wanting to get into fishing or are into fishing but want to branch out is, the regulations, right? The
Oh yeah.
laws, regulations, they're constantly changing, and I get phone calls all the time for people in the Portland area. Okay, I'm out of Gold Beach, Oregon, Grants Pass, Oregon. I can hardly keep up with what we have here, trying to stay a step ahead with the changes, the predictions, um, keeping up on the whatever it is, this stuff will shift, it'll change. People will call me from Portland area and want to know the regulations on the Columbia, and I just look at them, or say, hey, I have no idea. It changes weekly. I get email updates and it's different every week. So, just make sure whatever body of water you're fishing, okay? So this is a huge thing that I run into is don't trust your local tackle shop. Okay, you cannot always trust them. I've had people unintentionally steer my customers into making the wrong purchase, right? Telling them that to go salmon fishing, they only need a fishing license, or vice versa, right? So do your own due diligence, right? Like buying a house. You got to dig around a little bit and make sure that you know the ins and outs, okay? So if you're going to go steelhead fishing on any Oregon River, the regulations they're different based off of zone. You have your south zone, your north zone, right? So the south zone, there's different zone regulations on each body of water. And then there's seasons. There's times when you can't fish for steelhead. There's times when you can fish for steelhead. There's times when you can harvest a wild steelhead, right? You can keep one over a certain size limit. And there's times you can't. There's sections of river that you can and you can't. So do a little research, look into the zone regulations. So if you go into the 2024 sport fishing regulations, you scroll through the Southwest zone, you get to the Rogue River. There's going to be a long list of all the zones and the seasons, and then there's going to be exceptions and special regulations. You want to look at both of those.
How do people get a hold of you?
So in terms of getting a hold of me, I try to be all over. I'd try to keep pretty active on social media, Instagram, Facebook. I post as much as I can on there without giving up, all my secrets and all my spots to where I lose opportunity for my customers because I want to brag on Facebook, right? And then, Google, I got a website. You can type in Blair's Guide Service or roguebayfishing.com, has some information on, what we do, the places we fish, the run timings, our prices, and then some photos of their catches the last few years. A lot of salmon, steelhead. We do a little bit of sturgeon stuff, and we do fish offshore for rockfish and lingcod on occasion when the ocean allows.
Gotta love lingcod. I love lingcod.
Yeah, yep, yep.
It's like a fun fish to catch.
It
Like
really
pulling
is.
up a boat anchor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Crowd pleaser, as I call it. Everybody loves to go out there and get a nice link.
Welcome back to Terrible at Fishing. Well, this is getting exciting this time of year. As the waters warm up, the excitement for me grows. Now, I'm a bass fisherman, and so this segment is really going to be talking to the bass fisherman or anybody who wants to try something that is colossally fun. So hopefully that's everybody listening. So as the waters warm up, as they get closer to 70 degrees, we start getting the opportunity to catch fish on what we call topwater lures. Well, a topwater lure is a lure that stays on top of the water as we work it. There are lots of different topwater lures. Some of them are real simple for beginners to learn on. And those two, the first two is a wake bait and a whopper plopper. I know. Whopper ploppers and wake baits. A wake bait does exactly that. It has a lip that is vertical, and it pushes water, and it creates a wake behind it. And behind it, it creates not only this wake, but also some agitation. And you're able to pop it, and you can just go ahead and just do a straight retrieve on it, or do a few little tugs on it. This is one of the easiest baits to catch a fish on because the learning curve is simple. When you start pulling it, it's got to create that perfect V in a wake. Once you get that perfect V, you've got the right speed. And then just wait. And what ends up happening is that a bass will see it and blow up or break surface on it and grab it and then just reel them in. The great thing about topwater fishing is that topwater fishing, you get to see the bite. It's the only type of fishing you get to see the bite. And all other fishing is below the surface, and you don't get to see the bite. Now, this could be fun. Well, it's always fun. It could be frustrating, as we'll get it further into some of these topwater techniques. The next one is called a whopper plopper. I know, it's fun to say whopper plopper. A whopper plopper is a topwater bait with a propeller on the back. And I prefer ones with a hole in the propeller, and that creates more bubbles. So a whopper plopper is very easy also for a beginner. So you just toss it out there and retrieve it and get the propeller going. Once the propeller is going, it's going to start going, it'll make a sound like and that sound, as well as all the bubbles and the wake that it's creating, is going to excite the fish underneath. And you're just going to do a straight retrieve and bring that whopper plopper right back to you. And in about 10 feet of operations, a fish is going to see it and break surface and hit that whopper plopper. So that, again, is a very simple lure for you to use. So a whopper plopper and a wake lure are simple. Now, there are more complicated lures, and we call one called a spook or a pencil lure. This looks like kind of a cigar, and it's just a tube. Looks like a torpedo. That's what we'll say. We'll say it looks like a torpedo. And we also call this a walking bait. And you think, oh, how does that walk when it's, I'll tell you in a second. You toss this out there and it casts a mile. You can work a lot of water with a walking bait. And what you do with this is you're going to just, jerk the tip of your rod, just gradually. Just jerk the tip of your rod. What ends up happening with this little torpedo in the water, it's going to walk, shoot, dart, back and forth, back and forth. It's darting back and forth. And as you bring it to you, this takes some practice. But as you walk this bait back and forth on top of the water, it looks like a struggling fish on top of the water. And it's just going back and forth, until finally a fish notices it, breaks surface, and boom. A walking bait is so much fun, and they come in big sizes. Also, another one's called a popper. Now, basically, it's a torpedo with a mouth on it, on the front of it. And this is what we call a popper. And it does exactly that. When you toss it out there, that mouth on the front splashes water forward. So you're going to throw it out there, retrieve, and just pull it forward in little jerks. And it's going to splash water forward every time you do that. And again, it looks like a struggling fish. to a bass. And all of a sudden, it'll break surface on you and it will just explode. And it's just and that is a very simple lure. A little bit more technique than a whopper plopper or a wake bait. But once you get the rhythm down, so much fun. So we also have what we call hollow bodies. These are soft plastic lures and they have upturned hooks. We use hollow bodies. You can use hollow bodies on open water if you want. But I usually use hollow bodies in lily pads. And we got great lily pads areas in here. Dog Lake over by Dewey Reservoir. That really a great lake for lily pad fishing. A lot of lily pad islands in the summer there. Bass are big, a lot of fun. Lake of the Woods has several areas where you got lily pads. There are some really fun lily pad areas in the area. So, lily pad fishing is very hard. And it requires something that I'm not known for, self-control and patience. So, what you do with this is that this walking bait, this soft body, it looks like a frog or a spider or a rat or anything like that. You toss them on top of the lily pads and you walk it on top of the lily pads, literally. You're just bouncing it from lily pad to lily pad, swimming it in between the different lily pads. Then all of a sudden, a bass breaks surface on you. It explodes. And you go set the hook really fast. And you pull the bait right out of its mouth. Oh, how many times have I done that? Just pulled the bait right out of its mouth. So I would start watching videos and asking people techniques and stuff like that. This is very frustrating because it was so exciting for a moment and then I didn't get nothing. Well, the trick to lily pad fishing is several techniques. Or one technique and then several things that you can do to the bait. So if you like to lily pad fish, this is a very important moment on my radio show. So you get the explosion, the blow up on the water through the lily pads. The fish has it in its mouth. You get so excited, do not set the hook yet. Don't do it. Or you'll just pull that thing right out of its mouth. Let it dive back into the water briefly. That timing is brief, but it's important. I always tell people take a deep breath. When you see that explosion happen, the bass has it, just go, and then set the hook. Just take a deep breath, then set the hook. What ends up happening is that the bass will dive into the water, and when you set the hook, you're actually setting that hook into its lip instead of pulling it out of its mouth. But that deep breath is really, really important to allow that moment in time to happen so you can set that hook properly. Now, there are some things about soft plastics, the actual lure itself. Now, I've got in front of me several different ones. I know you can't see them, but I'm going to describe it. One of my coolest soft plastics to fish with is a Lunker Hunt Phantom Spider. It looks like a tarantula. It is the coolest bait to walk on top of the water because it looks like a real spider. And the fish love it, by the way. But one thing about soft plastics is that they're hollow. So they will go ahead and get drenched with water inside of it. The Lunker Hunt Spider, as much as I enjoy freaking people out about it, especially when there's swimmers nearby, just walk it near a swimmer, freak them out. I mean, that's if I'm ornery or I know the swimmer. And so this one right here is a fun, and it works really well, by the way. But it only works for a little while. Then it just gets old and it won't work anymore. It just takes on too much water all the time. When every few casts, you should be able to squeeze the soft body and squeeze out the water so it doesn't sink and it stays on top of the water. There are some other frog-like ones that have their upturned hooks, protrude above the body. This is not a good thing. You don't want the hook to protrude above the body. So what you're going to do is take your pliers and bend those hooks so they're at least level with the back of the frog. So if you look at your hollow body, make sure the hook does not extend above the back. Bend it down and make sure it's level with the back. So, and make sure that the plastic is nice and soft. It's real important. My favorite brand that I find I get the most hookup ratio with. So if a bass hits this, the odds of me reeling him in is better than all the other ones combined. And it's a brand called Toad Thumper. Yep, Toad Thumper. And now, we'll talk about colors in a second. The Toad Thumper, their upturned hooks are molded into the body. The body actually has a cavity on it, and these hooks literally are riding on the back of the body of the frog. So the plastic is really good. It doesn't take on water hardly at all, and yet it's soft enough to allow a bass to get hooked without me taking too deep a breath and still setting that hook. So that is really, the material that the frog is made out of, the soft plastic, is important. The way the hook is designed into that body is really important in order to get a better hookup. Now, there are two styles of these baits. There's a popper and a walker. So we already talked a little bit about poppers earlier. Basically, it's an open mouth, and it splashes forward. That's a popping frog. A walking frog is like that torpedo bait, that walking bait that we talked about earlier. It doesn't have, it's got sort of a rounded front to it, and you can walk it left and right, left and right. So I do really well with either one. I just want to make sure that I got a good hookup ratio. And the Toad Thumpers do that for me. They give me a good soft plastic that doesn't take on water and a hook that is molded into the body that is capable of setting the hook easily, bringing that bass into me. So I would really recommend this. Now, colors. Now, you would think a green one would work best because it looks like a frog, right? Well, not necessarily. Now, I've used green ones, yellow ones, chartreuse, orange, whatever. My favorite frog that I throw out there is a black frog. I don't know why, but it just is. The black frog, and it has a little bit of a chartreuse, the bright yellow-green on it, but it's almost all black. And so I use a black frog more than I use all other frogs. But if I find that my black frog is not working, I will go ahead and switch it over to a different color to see if indeed a color change, or even going from that's a walking frog, by the way, and I might go to a popping frog in order to get a different presentation to the bass. So when you go to a store, you want to be able to feel that weight or that bait. I will tell you, the Lunker Hunt Phantom Spiders, the coolest one to use because it's creepy cool on top of the water. It looks like a spider walking on the water, and it's great to scare the swimmers or your wife or whoever. But if you really want to catch more bass in those lily pads, which are huge bass, I would recommend a really good frog like Toad Thumper. Toad Thumper makes the best frogs I've ever used. Give them a shot and tell me what you think about it.